Hello and welcome to the channel. I recently experienced a seized caliper of my BMW Z4. I noticed a strong burning smell, the brakes felt like they were always on, and as you can see they ended up smoking pretty badly. So in this video I'm going to show you how I resolve the problem. First we need to loosen off the wheel bolts, then we need to chock the rear wheels and jack the car up until the wheel is off the ground. You should take extra care here to make sure you're on a level surface and always place an axle stand underneath the car, as a hydraulic jack can lose its pressure and fail, resulting in the car falling back to the ground without its wheel on. Then you can take out each of the bolts to remove the wheel and gain access to the brake caliper. To remove the caliper you need to take out the two mounting bolts which are located top and at the bottom here. You'll also need to remove the spring clip which is located at the front. Prising off this clip is easily done with a screwdriver. Then we loosen off and remove both of the caliper slide bolts. And you'll see here that the caliper is still stuck solid onto the brake disc. Next we're going to try and loosen off the bleed valve, see if that releases some of the pressure on the brake pads. As you can see, the caliper is still locked solid onto the disc, so I used a small section of wood and a hammer to lightly tap the caliper free from the disc. There are a number of reasons why a brake caliper can seize. One of the things to check is the recesses where the brake pads sit. Using some copper grease, easily obtained from any car parts retailer, I applied it to the points where the brake pad sits onto the mounting plate. I also applied some to the edges of the brake pads. I also put a small amount onto the back of the brake pad itself, as it helps to stop them from squealing. Another part you can check on the caliper is the slide bolts themselves. As there is a rubber boot over them, it's best to use red rubber grease, as it works well at high temperatures, but it's also safe to use with rubber. First you need to clear off the caliper slide bolts with some brake cleaner to remove all the baked-on brake dust and grime. Then apply an even coat of red rubber grease to the bolt themselves. Now this may solve the problem of the seized caliper, but in my case it wasn't that simple. So now we're going to remove the caliper entirely. I suggest loosening off this brake line before you remove the caliper, as it makes it much easier. Then you can unwind the caliper off the brake line. It's quite a long thread. Just make sure you've got something to clamp the brake line to stop the fluid coming out. There are specific tools to do this, but in this case I lightly clamped a pair of mole grips. As I use my car every day, I needed to keep it on the road, and for that reason I decided to get a used replacement caliper so I could fit it quickly, with the idea of refurbishing the caliper that I took off. I'll be sure to do another video on how I did that. So now it's just a reverse. You can install the caliper by winding it back onto the brake line. Then you need to push back the piston that's in the caliper. Again, there are specific tools for this. I just used a G-clamp and a small piece of wood. Then you can reinstall the brake pads. One of them has a little retainer clip, so that one goes into the piston. The other one can go onto the mounting bracket. Then with a bit of persuasion, the caliper will go back onto the disc. Insert the caliper slide bolts, and these need to be torqued down to 35 Newton meters. Then fit the retaining clip, which can be a bit fiddly. It's better to fit the two holes in the centre, and then you can bend back the arms into place. I used some brake cleaner to clear off anything that's got onto the disc itself. And the last thing we're going to need to do before putting the wheel back on is to bleed the brakes. I'm using a one-man bleeding kit here. Instructions on screen if you want to pause it, but essentially you just put the tube onto the bleed nipple, crack it to open half a turn, take the cap off the brake fluid reservoir, and then just pump the brakes in the car, and you'll see the fluid will come through and into the bottle. There's a one-way valve which stops it from flowing back the other way. Top up the brake fluid if necessary and put the cap back on, close the bleed nipple valve and remove the tubing. The wheel bolts are pretty tough to get off, so I'm using some more copper grease just to make it easier to loosen the bolts next time I remove the wheel. Lift the wheel onto the hub, making sure that the holes in the wheel are lined up with the holes on the disc, a lot easier to have the bolts already ready to go in a socket. Then you can tighten down the bolts using the style pattern, first by hand, and then using a socket wrench. And there we have it, one free moving wheel. Now you can remove the axle stand, lower the car to the floor, remove the chock from the rear wheel, and tighten down the bolts using a torque bar to 100 Newton meters. Now after all that, why not treat yourself, jump in the car and take it for a nice test drive. Overall it took me about an hour and a half to do. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.